You think of a shopping mall as a place where stores sell things, but the mall owner doesn't sell a single sweater, shoe, or smartphone. They sell the space between them. The global mall market was valued at roughly $2 trillion in 2022, and most people assume that money comes from retail. It doesn't. The mall owner is a landlord who makes money by controlling who walks past which door. Anchor stores like Macy's or JCPenney get cheap rent because they bring the crowd for free. The real revenue comes from the small stores that pay premium rates just to sit next to the traffic those anchors create. Before we continue, if you want to understand how these businesses actually work, the math behind what looks easy to own, subscribe to the channel. We break down the economics of things most people only see from the outside. This is the first trapdoor under the floor. Most people look at a crowded mall and see success, but crowded isn't the same as profitable. The mall owner doesn't actually want the highest possible foot traffic. They want the most valuable foot traffic. A teenager wandering for 3 hours without spending money is a cost, not a revenue. The owner designs the floor plan to filter for wallets, not people. The official story is that malls are real estate, but the deeper layer is that they are engineering platforms for tenant ecosystems. Each store plays a role. The food court exists not to make money directly, but to keep people inside for another hour. The cinema is a loss leader that transforms evening hours into prime retail time. The small boutique paying the highest rent per square foot is actually subsidizing the anchor store that barely covers its own operating cost. And here's the trap almost nobody sees. When you own a mall, every tenant is a risk and every vacancy is a crisis. Co-tenancy clauses are written into nearly every lease. That means if the anchor store leaves, the small stores have the legal right to reduce their rent or break their lease entirely. One departure can trigger a cascade, and once a mall loses its anchor, the foot traffic drops by something like 40 to 60% within 12 months. The mall doesn't slowly decline. It falls off a cliff. The annual operating costs for a typical regional mall range between $12 and $20 million before you even make a single payment on the construction debt. Those costs include property taxes, insurance, common area maintenance, security, utilities, and snow removal. You pay these whether the mall is full or empty. The profit margin on a shopping mall usually sits between 5 and 15%. That is not a high-margin business. It is an asset-heavy operating model where the margin is thin and the leverage is enormous. If this has been useful so far, a like helps more people discover this content. Let's walk through how the money actually flows. Every tenant pays base rent, which is a fixed amount per square foot per month. That's the predictable income. Then there is common area maintenance, or CAM, which covers the shared costs of keeping the mall running. CAM is billed back to tenants, but the owner takes a management fee on top of it. Then there is percentage rent. Once a store's gross sales cross an agreed threshold, the landlord takes a cut, often between 5 and 8% of every dollar above that line. This is where the upside lives. The owner isn't betting on how many stores fill the space. They are betting on how much each store sells. But here is the counterintuitive part. A mall owner wants the anchor stores to do well, but they don't want them to do too well. If an anchor generates enough sales to hit its percentage rent threshold, the owner collects more revenue, but the anchor also starts negotiating for lower base rent on renewal. The relationship is cooperative and adversarial at the same time. The owner has to balance keeping the anchor happy enough to stay, but not so strong that they can dictate terms. This is the invisible game that determines whether a mall survives or dies. Now let's talk about capital. A typical mall costs between $100 million and $300 million to build today. That money comes mostly from debt. The mall is financed with something like 60 to 70% leverage. The interest alone on that debt can eat $8 to $12 million a year before the mall generates a dollar of cash flow. Successful malls recoup their investment in 7 to 12 years. Failed malls take 20 to 30 years, meaning they never really recoup at all. The math is unforgiving. The structural fragility of the mall is not about bad management. It is about the dependence on a single variable: occupancy. If occupancy drops below 70%, the entire financial model breaks. The base rent falls shy of covering operating costs. The percentage rent evaporates because stores are selling less. The debt payments remain fixed. And now the owner faces a choice: inject more capital, sell at a loss, or watch the property enter foreclosure. The mall isn't a retail business. It is a capital-intensive real estate platform that requires perfect conditions to thrive and collapses quickly when those conditions change. You have seen the headlines: malls closing across America, Europe, and Asia. But the ones that survive aren't the ones with the most foot traffic. They are the ones with the most stable occupancy. Revenue durability matters more than raw numbers. An owner who locks in a high-quality tenant like a grocery store or a fitness center for a 20-year lease has a better asset than one who fills the same space with a trendy pop-up that pays double rent for 6 months. Stability beats volatility in this business every single time. This is the core insight. The mall owner is not a retailer. They are a gatekeeper. They control the path between the parking lot and the storefront. They sell access. The rent a small store pays is not for the 4 walls. It is for the people who walk past those walls. And the owner's entire strategy revolves around making sure those people keep coming. If they stop coming, everything stops. What business would you like us to analyze next? Drop it in the comments, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. See you in the next video. Let's look at a real example. The Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota, opened in 1992 with roughly 4 million square feet of retail space. It is considered one of the most successful malls in the world, generating somewhere in the range of 40 million visitors a year. But even this giant operates on thin margins. The debt structure alone required annual payments that made profitability a constant negotiation. The owners didn't get rich from store rents. They got rich from the hotels, the parking garages, the entertainment attractions, and the land value appreciation around the site. The retail was a magnet. The money came from everything else. Now consider the failure of the Rolling Acres Mall in Akron, Ohio. Opened in 1975, it thrived for 2 decades. Then an anchor store closed. The co-tenancy clauses triggered rent reductions across the property. Within 3 years, occupancy dropped below 40%. The mall became a ghost structure. It was eventually demolished in 2019. The owners lost millions. But here is the detail that matters. The management team wasn't incompetent. The occupancy cost was healthy. The location was solid. The problem was structural. One departure triggered a legal cascade that no amount of marketing could reverse. The lesson is that owning a mall is not about being a good retailer. It is about being a disciplined capital allocator. The owner who understands that the building is just a container for cash flows will survive the cycles. The owner who treats the mall as a lifestyle asset will lose it. The math is the same every time. You are betting that you can collect more in rent than you spend on debt, operations, and tenant turnover. And you are betting that the tenants who pay that rent will keep selling enough to stay alive. That structural cascade is exactly the kind of hidden mathematics most investors never see until it is too late. If this kind of layered financial thinking is what you are looking for, subscribe to keep uncovering the real numbers behind expensive assets, because the next breakdown might save you a much larger mistake. And let me ask you, have you ever encountered a co-tenancy clause or a hidden debt structure in your own experience? Drop the word structural in the comments and tell us what you found. If the anchor store is the engine, the inline stores are the fuel. But the fuel is expensive to find and expensive to keep. Every time a tenant leaves, the owner pays for the vacancy. The lost rent is obvious, but the hidden cost is the tenant improvement allowance. To attract a new tenant, the owner often pays for the build-out of the space. New flooring, new lighting, new storefront. That can cost $50 to $150 per square foot. On a 10,000 square foot space, that is $500,000 to $1.5 million before the new tenant pays a single dollar of rent. The second hidden cost is leasing commissions. Brokers take a cut of the first year or two of rent to find the tenant. That is money that never reaches the owner's pocket. Then there is the legal cost of drafting new leases, the marketing cost of advertising available space, and the administrative cost of negotiating co-tenancy protections. By the time a new store opens, the owner has spent 6 figures just to fill the hole left by the previous tenant. And if that new tenant fails within 18 months, the entire process starts again. This is why vacancy is not just a revenue problem. It is a capital problem. Every empty storefront burns cash twice, once from the lost rent and once from the cost of refilling it. A mall with a vacancy rate of 15% is not earning 85% of its potential income. It is earning 70% or less because the cost of managing those vacancies eats directly into the revenue that the occupied stores generate. The numbers look healthy on paper until you account for the leakage. There is a way to participate in mall economics without owning a single door. Real estate investment trusts, or REITs, allow investors to buy shares in a portfolio of malls and collect dividends from the rental income. Simon Property Group, the largest mall REIT in the United States, manages hundreds of properties. The dividend yield has historically ranged between 5 and 8%. That is a fraction of the return that a direct owner might chase, but it comes with no personal liability, no tenant negotiations, no snow removal bills, and no sleepless nights when an anchor leaves. The difference between owning a mall directly and owning shares in a REIT is the difference between being the captain of a ship and being a passenger on a fleet. The captain absorbs the full risk of the storm. The passenger pays a ticket and watches the horizon. For most people, the passenger seat is the smarter choice. The emotional appeal of owning a physical mall is strong. The spreadsheet rarely supports it. The data shows that the majority of individual investors who buy a mall directly sell within a decade, often at a loss. The REIT holders who stay invested for 2 decades earn consistent, if unspectacular, returns. The verdict is simple. A shopping mall is a capital-intensive machine that converts foot traffic into rental income. It works beautifully when occupancy is high, interest rates are low, and consumer behavior is stable. It collapses fast when any of those variables shift. The owner is not a retail visionary. They are a risk manager who must balance debt, tenant relationships, and operational costs every single day. The glamour of walking through a crowded atrium does not survive a look at the balance sheet. The truth is under the floor where the math lives. You are not buying a building. You are buying a stream of payments that depends entirely on the behavior of strangers who have no loyalty to you. The moment they stop coming, the stream dries up, and the building becomes a liability instead of an asset. The spreadsheets that looked elegant at closing turn into loss statements within 2 quarters. The most successful mall owners understand this better than anyone. They do not fall in love with the marble floors or the atrium skylights. They treat every square foot as a unit of cash flow that must earn its keep. They cut underperforming wings, convert vacant anchor spaces into entertainment venues or medical clinics, and renegotiate leases before the co-tenancy clauses explode. They are not optimists. They are mathematicians who assume the worst case and build a structure that can survive it. The mall you walk through on a Saturday afternoon is the visible result of thousands of invisible decisions about debt, tenant mix, and capital allocation. The crowd makes it look effortless. The financial statements tell a different story. Every occupied store is a temporary victory in a permanent war against vacancy, interest payments, and changing consumer habits. The war never ends. The owner simply fights it one lease renewal at a time. And that is the truth that sits underneath the glamour. A shopping mall is not a monument to commerce. It is a financial instrument that converts human attention into rent. The owner who treats it as anything else will eventually be reminded of the difference by the math that never lies. The business model only works when every component aligns. The debt market has to be cooperative. The consumer has to be spending. The tenants have to be profitable enough to stay, but not so profitable that they demand ownership of their own space. If one piece shifts, the entire structure trembles. That is not pessimism. That is the geometry of leverage. A mall owner does not need a disaster to fail. They only need normal turbulence applied to a fragile frame. There is a reason the largest mall owners in the world trade on public markets at single-digit price-to-earnings ratios. The market understands the fragility better than the dreamers who want to cut a ribbon. Simon Property Group, Unibail Rodamco Westfield, and Klépierre all trade at valuations that reflect the structural risk embedded in every lease. Investors do not pay a premium for buildings full of people. They discount the probability that the people will leave. The numbers that define this business are not romantic. The annual operating cost of $12 to $20 million. The payback period of 7 to 12 years on a successful bet. The co-tenancy clauses that can turn one closure into a cascade. The tenant improvement costs that consume 6 figures every time a space turns over. These are not the details that appear in the developer brochure. They are the details that determine whether a mall survives or becomes another headline about retail apocalypse. That is the geometry of leverage. A mall owner does not need a disaster to fail. Only normal turbulence applied to a fragile frame. If this breakdown of hidden costs and structural risk has changed how you see the shopping centers around you, subscribe so you do not miss the next time we pull back the curtain on a business that looks easy from the outside. And in the comments, drop the one unromantic number from this video that surprised you most, whether it is 7 figures in tenant improvements or 10 years of waiting for a return. Your answer tells me which piece of this puzzle you will never look at the same way again. The mall survives when it stops pretending to be a retail business. The properties that thrive today are the ones that have diversified beyond stores entirely. Apartments built above the parking garage, medical offices in former department store wings, fitness centers and climbing walls and indoor water parks that keep people on site for hours instead of minutes. The mall that depends solely on selling clothes and electronics is a museum of a consumer era that has already passed. The mall that treats itself as a community hub has a chance, but even that transformation costs money. Converting a vacant anchor store into a medical clinic requires millions in structural changes. Adding residential units requires zoning approvals, environmental studies, and years of construction. The owner who recognizes the need for reinvention may not have the capital to execute it. The owner who has the capital may not have the patience to wait for the returns. The gap between recognizing the problem and funding the solution is where most malls die. Let us return to the central contradiction. The mall looks like a place of abundance. Wide corridors, bright lighting, endless choices. But the economics beneath it are austere. Every square foot must justify its existence. Every lease must cover its share of the debt. Every tenant must perform or be replaced at a cost that erodes the margin of the tenants that remain. The abundance is a product of constant scarcity management. The owner does not relax. They recalculate. The people who succeed in this business are not the ones who love shopping. They are the ones who love spreadsheets. They understand that the building is just a container for cash flows that must be optimized, protected, and collected. The foot traffic is not a measure of success. It is a measure of potential. The actual success is measured in net operating income per square foot, in occupancy cost ratios, in weighted average lease terms that prevent the co-tenancy cascade from ever starting. This is the perspective that the outside observer never sees. The mall is not a retail palace. It is a financial machine with a very narrow range of conditions under which it works. When interest rates rise, the machine slows. When consumer habits shift, the machine stalls. When a single anchor tenant decides to close 50 stores nationwide, the machine can break in a single quarter. The machine does not care about the architecture or the memories or the community gatherings. The machine only cares about the rent. The most honest assessment of owning a mall is that it is a job for someone who thrives on managing risk under pressure. It is not passive income. It is active financial engineering with a physical asset that does not forgive mistakes. The owner who treats it as a trophy will lose it. The owner who treats it as a spreadsheet has a chance. And the investor who buys shares in a diversified REIT gets the return without the headache, which is the closest thing to a free lunch this sector provides. The mall is a monument to a specific idea about American life. The idea that people would gather in a climate-controlled box to buy things they did not know they needed, surrounded by strangers, driven by a curated sense of aspiration and scarcity. That idea is not dead, but it is no longer automatic. It must be engineered, financed, and defended against 1,000 small forces that would pull it apart. The mall that survives is the one whose owner understands that the real product is not merchandise. The real product is attention, and attention has to be earned every single day.